On the distant planet of Vicaris, far beyond the reach of Earth's influence, an alien race ruled with iron fists. Their empire was vast, stretching across dozens of worlds, enslaving species that they deemed inferior. These conquered races lived in servitude, their lives shaped by the whims of their alien masters. Arya, a member of the once proud Varanti people, was one of the many slaves who toiled under the harsh rule of the Vorath, the ruling alien species of Vicaris. For Arya, life had once held meaning. She had been a warrior in her prime, strong, proud, and respected by her people. But after the war, the disastrous war that led to her people's downfall, she had been reduced to nothing. Her once mighty race was crushed, their cities burned, their warriors slaughtered. The few survivors were captured and thrown into brutal slave camps, where they lived in misery and constant fear. Arya had been shackled, not just by chains, but by the cruel fate that had befallen her people. Her once powerful arms now trembled under the weight of the metal shackles that bound her to the ground. She had been beaten, humiliated, and forced to work in the fields, alongside other prisoners who were also slaves in this alien world. Their hands were worn raw from labor, and their faces showed the hopelessness that had become their reality. The Vorath ruled through fear. Their technology was far more advanced than any of the species they enslaved, and they had a brutal, oppressive system in place to ensure obedience. The alien overlords had no care for the suffering of their slaves. They saw them as little more than tools to be used for labor, for sport, and for whatever cruel pleasures they could devise. Arya had known better days. Her people had once been a proud, noble race. They had their own advanced technology, their own rich culture. But that had been before the Vorath had come, before the invasion that had shattered everything. Now, she was nothing. Just another broken soul who had lost everything and whose existence barely mattered. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The endless work never ceased. She and the other prisoners were forced to mine precious minerals in the deepest, most dangerous caverns of the planet. Every day they worked until they could barely stand, only to be whipped into motion if they slowed down. The overseers were harsh, their eyes cold and unforgiving. The prisoners were treated like animals, treated worse even. The Vorath were indifferent to the suffering they caused. Their only goal was control. Arya had grown used to the pain, the exhaustion, and the humiliation. It was hard to remember what it had been like before all of this, before her people had been defeated, before she had been chained and brought to this miserable place. There were nights when she cried, but the tears had long since dried up. Now, all she felt was an empty void inside her. The spark of resistance she had once carried had been snuffed out by the weight of her shackles. She had no fight left in her, and yet, deep within her, something still stirred. A whisper, a memory of her old self, the fierce warrior, the proud Varanti who had fought for her people and her freedom. It was a flicker, faint and fragile, but it was still there. The morning began like any other. The sky above was a dull gray, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. Arya stood among the other slaves, her back bent under the weight of her work. The overseers, Vorath soldiers who were all taller, stronger, and more vicious than any of. The slaves moved about with their whips and their cruel words. The work was brutal. They had to carry heavy loads of mined minerals, sometimes for miles, without rest. Arya's hands were raw from the constant contact with sharp stones. Her shoulders ached, and her legs trembled with every step. But she kept moving. She had no choice. To stop was to invite punishment, and she had learned long ago that punishment often meant death. It wasn't just the physical work that drained her. It was the mental toll. Every day was the same. No hope, no escape, no future. Her people, once so proud, were now nothing more than ghosts in the eyes of the Vorath. It was hard to believe that freedom had ever existed, let alone that it could ever exist again. But on this day, something was different. As Arya dragged a heavy cart full of minerals through the rocky path, she noticed something unusual in the distance. A ship, a strange ship, not one of the Vorath craft that regularly patrolled the planet. This ship was different. It was sleek and fast-looking, with markings that Arya did not recognize. The ship touched down silently, its engines barely making a sound, as it landed in the distance, far from the camp. Arya's heart raced. Could it be? Could this be the moment she had been waiting for? Was someone finally coming to free them? She dared not hope. Hope was dangerous here, but her curiosity got the better of her, and she couldn't help but stare as the ship's hatch opened. A figure emerged. A human. Arya's eyes widened in surprise. Humans? They were not common in this part of the galaxy. In fact, most of the slaves had never seen one up close. Arya had only heard rumors of humans, brave, resourceful, and dangerous to the Vorath. Could this human be a rescuer? Was he here to save them? The human soldier, Captain Jace Delacroix, stood tall as he stepped off the ship. His uniform was different from the usual attire Arya had seen worn by the Vorath or their allies. It was simple but well-made, and he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to battle. He looked around, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Arya couldn't believe it. He wasn't here for some mission to kill or conquer. He seemed different, out of place in a good way. There was something in the way he carried himself that made Arya think he wasn't like the others. Jace took a step toward the slave camp, and as he did, a small group of Vorath soldiers noticed him. Their expressions turned to scowls. One of the soldiers shouted something in their harsh language, and Jace raised his hand, signaling for the slave driver to stop. Jace's voice was calm but firm. "I'm here for them," he said, his gaze locking onto Arya. Arya's heart raced. Could it be? Was this truly a moment of freedom? The Vorath soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Their arrogance kept them from acting quickly. They didn't expect a human to interfere. But Jace's posture was unyielding. It was clear he wasn't backing down. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Jace continued. "I'm here to free them." The Vorath soldiers snarled, their hands going to their weapons, but before they could draw, Jace moved. With swift precision, he disabled the nearest soldier, sending him sprawling to the ground. The others hesitated for just a moment too long, and that was all Jace needed. As the last of the Vorath soldiers fell, Jace turned to the prisoners, his eyes scanning their faces. His gaze landed on Arya. He could see the weariness in her eyes, the brokenness. He could see the flicker of fear of hope, fear of trust, fear of believing that freedom was possible. Arya's mind raced. She had heard stories of humans. Before, brave, reckless, and sometimes kind. But could she trust this man? Could she trust anyone? She had been burned too many times by empty promises, but there was something in his eyes, something that spoke of a different kind of strength. The kind that didn't come from cruelty or violence, the kind that came from hope. "Do you want to be free?" Jace asked, his voice steady. For a long moment, Arya said nothing. The weight of the question settled over her like a heavy cloak. Freedom? Could she even remember what that felt like? Finally, she nodded, the smallest of movements. It was all she could manage. Jace smiled and stepped forward, offering her his hand. "Then come with me." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Arya dared to hope. Arya's heart raced as she stood there, staring at the human who had come to free her. The air around her felt thick, heavy with the weight of 1,000 thoughts and fears. She had been a slave for so long that it seemed impossible to believe that someone could truly come to save her. All the years of hardship, the pain, the endless labor, they had all shaped her into someone who could hardly remember what it was like to feel hope. The man, Captain Jace Delacroix, was different. He wasn't like the Vorath overseers who ruled with cruelty. He wasn't like the others who had come and gone, offering empty promises of freedom but never staying long enough to fulfill them. There was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place, that made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of trust. Jace watched Arya carefully, waiting for any sign that she might make a move. Her eyes were wide, and her posture stiff, as though she was still unsure whether to believe in his offer. The other slaves in the camp were also watching, their faces showing a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and fear. "You have nothing to fear," Jace said, his voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. If you want to be free, you have to trust me." Arya didn't move. She simply stood there, her chains rattling slightly with the wind. The sight of her shackles sent a shiver down Jace's spine. It was hard to believe that such cruelty still existed in the galaxy. She was so much more than this, so much more than the person the Vorath had turned her into. "I don't know if I can trust you," Arya replied softly, her voice hoarse from years of misuse. "I've been promised freedom before, but all it ever brought was more pain." Jace nodded, understanding the depth of her doubt. He had seen it before. Many times. The weight of oppression, the scars that ran deeper than skin. Trust was something that had to be earned, and he knew he couldn't expect Arya to believe in him right away. "I get it," Jace said. "You've been hurt. You've been broken. But I'm not like the others. I won't leave you in the dirt." Arya looked away, her eyes scanning the camp. The Vorath were still on the ground, unconscious but not dead. Jace had been quick, too quick for them to react. The rest of the overseers had scattered, too afraid to challenge him, but they wouldn't be gone for long. It was only a matter of time before they realized what had happened and sent reinforcements. "I can't leave," Arya whispered, more to herself than to Jace. "I don't even know how. Where would I go? What if you leave me too? What if you betray me like the others?" Jace stepped forward, not too fast, but close enough for her to see the sincerity in his eyes. "You won't be alone. I won't betray you. I'll make sure you're safe." His words were like a balm to her wounded soul. For a moment, she almost believed him. Almost. But the chains on her wrists were a reminder of everything she had lost, everything she had been forced to endure. She was broken. She had been a warrior once, proud and strong, but now she was just a prisoner in her own body. Could she really take a chance on this human? Could she risk everything on someone who might just be another stranger promising things he couldn't keep? Jace saw the conflict in her eyes. He understood that this wasn't an easy decision for her. It wasn't just about trusting him. It was about trusting herself again. And that, he knew, would take time. "I won't rush you," Jace said gently. "But I'll be here when you're ready. You don't have to make the decision now. I'm giving you a chance, a choice. But it's up to you whether you take it." Arya stood there, her heart pounding. The wind rustled the tattered clothes of the other slaves, who now stood in silence, watching the exchange. They were all too afraid to act, too afraid to hope. But Jace's words were different. They were a lifeline in a world that had only shown her cruelty. They were the spark of something that could be more, something worth fighting for. After what felt like an eternity, Arya nodded, slowly, barely perceptible. But it was enough. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Jace's face softened into a smile, and for the first time since he had set foot on this forsaken planet, he felt a glimmer of hope himself. He had made the right choice in coming here. And now, together, they would change the course of their futures. As Jace moved to unlock the shackles on Arya's wrists, the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. The reinforcements were coming, faster than Jace had anticipated. He cursed under his breath. There wasn't enough time to free all the slaves, but there was time to get Arya out. "Stay close," Jace ordered, his tone sharp and commanding. He reached for his weapon, a compact energy pistol that he kept on hand for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to get them through the next few minutes. Arya, now freed from her chains, glanced around nervously. She was unused to being free, and the fear of being caught again was stronger than anything she had felt in years. Her heart was still heavy with doubt, but she pushed it down. She had made the decision. She couldn't turn back now. They moved, quickly through the camp, Jace leading the way and Arya following close behind. The other slaves watched them go, their faces a mixture of disbelief and longing. They had seen so many failed attempts at freedom, so many rebels crushed before they could escape. They didn't dare follow, not yet. They would wait and see if Jace could really get away. As they reached the edge of the camp, the sound of Vorath, soldiers shouting, echoed in the distance. The first wave of reinforcements had arrived. "They're close," Jace muttered, his voice tight. "We need to hurry." Arya's breath came in short bursts, her legs burning from the effort of running. After years of being forced to move at the Vorath's pace, she was slower than Jace, but she pushed herself to keep up. They reached the ship, a small, sleek craft with a low profile that looked almost like a shadow against the landscape. Jace opened the hatch with a quick press of a button, and they both climbed inside. Inside the ship, the air was cooler, and the low hum of the engines was a welcome sound compared to the chaos outside. Arya took a seat near the rear of the cockpit, her eyes still wide with disbelief. She was free. For the first time in years, she was free. But as the hatch closed and the ship lifted off the ground, Arya couldn't help but feel a nagging fear. What would come next? Could she really start over? Could she trust this human to guide her to safety? Jace glanced over at her, his eyes softening. "It's going to be okay," he said. "You're safe now." But Arya wasn't so sure. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. As the ship soared through the sky, leaving the slave camp behind, Arya couldn't help but wonder if she was truly ready for the freedom she had just been given. The journey was only just beginning, and she had no idea where it would lead. But one thing was certain, she wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The ship's engines hummed steadily as it soared through the atmosphere of Vicaris. Arya sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the dark sky outside the ship's small window. The planet that had been her prison for so long was shrinking away, growing, smaller and smaller with every passing second. It was hard to believe that she was really free. The chains were gone, but the weight of years of oppression still clung to her heart. She stole a glance at the man who had come to her rescue, Captain Jace Delacroix. He was focused on piloting the ship, his hands steady on the controls. Despite the calm exterior he projected, Arya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched every now and then as if he were bracing for something. Jace had been kind, patient even, but Arya wasn't sure if she could trust him completely. She hadn't been free for long enough to let go of the fear that had been ingrained in her for so many years. The fear of being betrayed, the fear of being used again. "Are you okay?" Jace's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle and steady. Arya looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice still shaky. "I thought I knew what it felt like to be free, but this is different. I don't know what comes next." Jace gave her a reassuring smile, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "You don't have to know everything right now. You've taken the first step, and that's the hardest one. We'll figure it out together." His words felt like a small comfort, but they did little to quiet the storm in her mind. The life she had known was gone. Her people, her home. Everything she had fought for. It was all lost. And now, she was on the run, with nothing but a human soldier at her side, heading into an uncertain future. But there was something in Jace's eyes, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could find a new purpose. The ship flew silently through space, leaving the dark planet behind. Arya could feel the pull of something new, something she hadn't thought possible. It was freedom, yes, but it was also the unknown. It was a chance at a life beyond the chains, a chance to find something she hadn't even known she was looking for. After several hours of silent flight, the ship's console beeped, breaking the stillness of the cabin. Jace leaned forward, scanning the screen. "We're almost out of the system," Jace said, his voice low. "Once we're clear, we'll be heading to a safer place. It's a place where the Vorath can't reach us." Arya's heart raced at the mention of the Vorath. Even though they had escaped the camp, the Vorath were not easily defeated. They were a brutal empire, with resources far greater than anything Arya could have imagined. If they wanted her back, they would stop at nothing to find her. "What's the plan?" Arya asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. Jace turned to face her, his expression serious. "We're going to find a place where you can start over. But, to get there, we need to stay one step ahead of the Vorath. I've got a contact on a remote station where we can lay low for a while. It's a bit of a risk, but it's our best shot." Arya nodded, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The idea of laying low, of hiding, was terrifying. She wasn't sure if she was ready to spend another moment in fear. But what choice did she have? She had no home, no people left to turn to. She was alone in the universe, with nothing but this human and his promise of safety. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Arya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jace met her gaze, his eyes hardening slightly. "They will. It's only a matter of time. The Vorath won't let you go without a fight. But we'll be ready." The conversation turned quiet after that, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. Arya's thoughts began to race again. She didn't know if she was ready for the fight Jace was preparing for. She had never been a soldier, never been trained for war. All she had ever known was survival. And survival was something that had become instinctive to her. But surviving wasn't the same as fighting. She glanced at Jace again, trying to read his face. He was a soldier, a warrior by profession. He knew how to fight, but Arya wasn't. Sure if she could be that. She didn't know if she had the strength in her anymore to stand up against the Vorath, to face the people who had taken everything from her. "Do you think I can do it?" Arya asked, her voice barely audible. Jace's eyes softened, and he leaned back in his seat, considering her question carefully. "I think you've already done it. You've survived. That's more than most can say." Arya shook her head, frustration rising in her chest. "Surviving isn't enough. I want to do more. I want to fight back. But I don't know if I'm strong enough." Jace paused for a moment before replying, his voice calm but firm. "You don't need to fight like a soldier to be strong. You've already shown strength just by standing up and walking away from the life they wanted to force you into. That's a strength most people never find." Arya's eyes flickered with something like understanding. Maybe she wasn't broken, after all. Maybe she could find a way to rebuild herself, even in a world that had taken everything from her. Maybe there was still something worth fighting for. "We'll figure it out," Jace continued, his voice reassuring. "But first we need to get to the station. We'll get there, regroup, and make a plan. I'll be with you every step of the way." Arya nodded, feeling the smallest flicker of hope. She still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could make it. She had made it this far. She could keep going. Hours passed, and the ship finally broke through the last layers of the atmosphere, leaving the planet behind. The stars stretched out before them, endless and vast. The hum of the engines was a comforting sound, a reminder that they were safe, for now. As they moved through deep space, Jace set the ship on autopilot, and the two of them settled into a moment of quiet. Arya was exhausted, physically and mentally, but she couldn't bring herself to sleep. Her thoughts were too restless, too filled with uncertainty. Jace seemed to sense her unease, and after a while he spoke again. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice softer now. "But you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. You don't have to carry the weight of the past by yourself." Arya met his gaze, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and fear. "But what if I can't do it?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What if I'm too broken to fight back?" Jace's eyes softened, and he reached over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not broken," he said firmly. "You've survived things that would have crushed most people. That's not weakness. That's strength. And I believe in you." For the first time since she had been freed, Arya felt a flicker of peace. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future would hold. But maybe, just maybe, she could find her way. With Jace at her side, anything felt possible. The small station was a quiet refuge, nestled in the outskirts of the galaxy where the Vorath could not easily reach. The air was cooler here, and the hum of the station's systems was soothing, a contrast to the chaotic life Arya had left behind. The first few days were spent recovering, both physically and mentally. Jace had kept his word, providing her with everything she needed, but even more than that, he gave her space. Time to think. Time to breathe. The station was a mix of abandoned facilities and hidden outposts, remnants of a time long past. It was peaceful here, but Arya didn't feel at peace. She still carried the weight of the past with her, the memories of being enslaved and tortured. But in this place, far from the Vorath, she felt something else. The urge to fight, the urge to reclaim what was lost. Jace had been right. She was stronger than she had believed, and now, with this small sliver of safety, she could begin to rebuild. "Are you ready?" Jace's voice broke through her thoughts, drawing her out of her quiet reflection. Arya looked up from where she stood by the window, staring out into the stars. She had always felt the weight of the sky, the endless expanse that seemed both beautiful and cruel. Now, it felt like a canvas, an opportunity to reshape her life. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "What's the plan?" Jace smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "The Vorath won't stop looking for you. We need to take the fight to them before they find us. We need to hit them where it hurts." Arya felt a surge of adrenaline at the words. Take the fight to them? She had never considered herself a fighter, but something inside her was awakening. Something primal. Something that had been buried deep inside her for far too long. She was no longer just a survivor. She was going to fight back. "I'm with you," Arya said, her voice firm. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Jace had connections to a small group of rebels, individuals who had been resisting the Vorath in secret for years. They had set up a base on the station, hidden away from the eyes of the Vorath, and now Jace was preparing to bring them into the fight. "We're not going to overthrow the Vorath overnight," Jace said as they gathered in a small, dimly lit room on the station. "But we can start by sabotaging their supply lines. We can weaken their control over the outer systems." Arya nodded, understanding the plan. It was a beginning, a small strike to show the Vorath that they weren't as invincible as they thought. The rebels on the station were a diverse group, ranging from former soldiers to civilians who had lost everything to the Vorath. There were men and women, all with their own reasons for fighting. Arya was surprised at how much she had in common with them. They had all been crushed by the Vorath, but they hadn't given up. And now, They were fighting back. Jace led the group in a meeting to discuss the plan. Arya stood quietly at the back, listening to the strategies being outlined. Her mind was focused, her heart beating faster as the plan took shape. This was real. This wasn't just a dream. She was going to be part of something bigger. "Arya!" Jace's voice called out, breaking her concentration. "You'll lead a team to disable the Vorath's communication relay. It's a vital part of their control system. And if we can take it out, we'll slow down their ability to coordinate attacks." Arya felt a shock of surprise and then a surge of pride. Lead a team? She had never led anyone before, let alone a group of rebels planning to take on the Vorath. But there was no hesitation in her voice when she answered. "I'll do it." Jace gave her an encouraging nod. "I believe in you." With the plan set in motion, the team quickly began preparing. They had limited resources, but they were determined. Jace's confidence in her gave Arya the strength she needed to focus. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment to prove that she wasn't just a slave anymore. She was a warrior, and this was her fight. The night before the mission, Arya couldn't sleep. She lay on the small cot in her quarters, staring up at the ceiling. The silence of the station was both comforting and unsettling. She was used to the noise of the Vorath, the constant sounds of whips cracking, orders being shouted, the clanging of chains. Here the stillness was deafening. Arya sat up, pulling on her boots and walking to the window. She could see the stars again, that endless sea of light and darkness. But now the stars felt different. They didn't seem so far away. They didn't seem so out of reach. She was no longer just a slave. She was no longer bound by chains. Tomorrow she would make her mark. Tomorrow she would fight. There was a knock at the door. Arya turned to see Jace standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the corridor. "You're up late," Jace said softly, stepping into the room. "Can't sleep?" Arya shook her head. "I'm ready, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It feels unreal." Jace smiled, sitting down on the edge of the cot. "I get that. This is the moment you've been waiting for. It's a lot to take in. But you're stronger than you think, Arya." Arya looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was trust. Trust in her. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Good," Jace said. "That means you care. It means you're human. Fear is natural, Arya, but you don't have to let it control you." She nodded, absorbing his words. The fear would always be there, but it didn't have to stop her. She had a mission, a purpose now. Tomorrow, she would be part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. The next morning, Arya stood with the rest of the team, preparing to leave the station. The ship that would take them to their target was ready. The crew was assembled, and everyone was in position. The tension was palpable as the final checks were made. Arya's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood tall, her hands steady as she checked her gear. "We're ready," Jace said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Let's show the Vorath that we're not afraid." The journey to the Vorath relay station was long and dangerous. The group had to navigate through hidden routes, avoiding Vorath patrols along the way. Every step of the mission was fraught with danger. But Arya kept her focus. She was no longer just a slave. She was part of a rebellion. She was fighting for her freedom. As they approached the relay station, the tension in the air grew thicker. Arya's heart raced, but she didn't allow herself to hesitate. She had a job to do. The relay was heavily guarded, but they had a plan. Jace led the way, with Arya and the rest of the team following closely behind. They moved quietly, slipping past the guards and entering the heart of the station. The air was cold and sterile, filled with the hum of the Vorath's technology. But to Arya, it was the sound of oppression. It was the sound of everything she had lost. They reached the control room, and the team got to work. Aria's hands moved quickly as she disabled the relay's power grid, her mind focused on the task at hand. Every second counted. The Vorath would be here soon. Almost done, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Jace glanced over at her, his eyes filled with pride. You're doing great. The moment the relay went down, the Vorath's communications were crippled. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The group quickly moved out, making their way back to the ship before reinforcements could arrive. As they flew back to the station, the mission a success, Aria couldn't help but smile. The weight of the past was still with her, but it didn't feel as heavy. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. The first step in the fight to take back what the Vorath had stolen. Jace turned to her, a smile on his face. How do you feel? The mission was a success, but the victory felt small in comparison to the challenges ahead. As the ship descended toward the station, Aria sat quietly, staring out at the stars that seemed so distant, yet so full of possibility. The weight of the past still clung to her, but it felt lighter now. The small victory, the sabotage of the Vorath's communications relay, was just the beginning. It was the first step toward a future she had long given up on. Jace's voice broke through her thoughts, calm but firm. We did it. That's one step closer to where we want to be. Aria nodded, her eyes still focused on the stars. One step, she repeated quietly. But it's a start. Jace looked over at her with a small smile, clearly proud of her. It's a big start. Don't underestimate how much we've accomplished. She turned to look at him, her mind still swirling with thoughts and emotions. I don't know if I can keep doing this. The Vorath are everywhere. We're just one small group. How can we stand up to them? Jace's gaze softened, and for a moment, the quiet, confident leader seemed like someone much more human. Someone who understood the doubt that crept into the hearts of those who fought against impossible odds. I know how it feels, he said. But you're not alone anymore. You're part of something bigger than just you and me. His words settled over her like a warm blanket, comforting yet heavy with the truth. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone, but for so long she had felt like it. Now, for the first time in a long time, she had found a place where she belonged. But the journey was far from over. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. The station had become their new base of operations, a place to rest, regroup, and plan the next steps. Aria spent most of her time training, working with Jace and the other members of the rebellion. She wasn't the strongest fighter, but she was learning fast. She had to. But training was only a small part of the battle. The real challenge lay in rallying others to their cause. Jace had told her time and time again that this wasn't just about small skirmishes. They needed to unite people. They needed to show them that the Vorath could be defeated. They needed to build a rebellion, something that could stand up to the Empire and make a real difference. One afternoon, as she finished a training session, Aria walked to the central command room of the station. Jace was there, speaking to a small group of people, including several of the leaders from the local rebel factions. The conversation was serious, the plans for the next phase of the rebellion beginning to take shape. You've all done well, Jace was saying as she entered, his voice steady. But we need to keep pushing forward. The Vorath aren't going to stop. We can't stop either. If we do, everything we've worked for will be lost. Aria stood at the back of the room, quietly listening. The room was filled with a mix of nervous energy and determination. The leaders were a mix of different species, and each one had their own story of loss and survival. The Vorath had taken everything from them, just as they had taken everything from her. But they weren't going to give up. Aria's mind drifted back to the fight they had just waged. how it had felt to stand side by side with people who had nothing left to lose but still fought with everything they had. They were stronger than she had ever realized. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for their future. And for the first time in a long time, Arya felt the fire of hope begin to burn inside her. The meeting continued, but Arya's thoughts remained focused on something Jace had said earlier. They needed to do more. They couldn't just sabotage Vorath operations. They needed to strike at the heart of the Empire. They needed a plan to shake the Vorath to their core. She approached the table where Jace was speaking. "What if we did? More than just hit their supply lines?" she asked, her voice cutting through the conversation. "What if we went after something bigger? A high-ranking official or one of their strongholds, something that would make them sit up and take notice?" Jace turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. "That's a bold move, but it could work. If we target something that really matters to them, it'll send a message. We can't just be a thorn in their side. We need to be a threat." The room fell silent as everyone considered her suggestion. There was a long pause before one of the leaders spoke up. "We've been thinking about something similar," the leader said, a woman with dark green skin and sharp eyes. "The Vorath have a supply base on one of the outer planets. It's heavily guarded, but if we can break in and disable their weapon systems, it'll slow them down for weeks. It's risky, but it could be exactly what we need." Jace's eyes gleamed with the spark of determination. "It's a start," he said. "We'll need to move quickly. If we can take that base out, it will give us time to plan our next move." Arya felt the weight of the decision settle in her chest. This was a huge risk, one that could turn the tide of the rebellion or end it all. But they had come this far. There was no turning back now. "I'll lead the team," Arya said, her voice strong. Jace's gaze softened, but he didn't hesitate. "You're ready? We'll make it happen." The days leading up to the mission were filled with preparations. Arya spent every waking moment going over the plan, making sure she was ready. She knew the risk. The Vorath weren't going to make it easy, but she was ready for this. She had to be. On the day of the mission, Arya stood on the ship's loading platform, dressed in her combat gear. The weight of her weapon felt familiar in her hands, a reminder that she wasn't the same person she had been. She had been a slave, a prisoner. But now she was a fighter. She was a leader. And today, she would prove it. The team was assembled. Jace, several of the rebel soldiers, and a few technicians who could disable the Vorath weapons systems. They had one shot at this. If they failed, it would be the end of the rebellion. Arya looked around at the faces of her team. They were all determined. They had all lost something to the Vorath, just as she had. But they weren't going to let it define them. They were going to take back what had been stolen. The journey to the Vorath base was long and dangerous. They had to fly under the radar, avoiding the Vorath patrols that scoured the area. The tension was palpable as they neared the target. Arya's heart beat faster with each passing minute. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. As they reached the planet, the ship touched down in a hidden valley. The team moved quickly, their footsteps silent on the rocky terrain. Arya's mind was sharp, her senses alert. Every move they made was calculated. There was no room for error. They infiltrated the base, sneaking past the guards and making their way to the weapon systems. The plan was simple. Disable the base's defenses, take out their weapon systems, and then escape before the Vorath could retaliate. The team worked quickly, moving in perfect sync. Arya was at the front, leading the way. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, but she didn't let it slow her down. The mission had to succeed. There was no other option. In the final moments, as the weapons systems were taken offline and the Vorath base began to fall into chaos, Arya felt a rush of exhilaration. They had done it. They had struck at the heart of the Vorath Empire. As they made their way back to the ship, the team was exhausted, but triumphant. The fight was far from over. but they had made their mark. They had shown the Vorath that they were no longer untouchable. As the ship took off, leaving the burning base behind them, Arya couldn't help but smile. It had been a long, difficult road, but for the first time in a long time, she believed in the future. The rebellion was growing stronger, and so was she. She wasn't just a slave anymore. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for something worth living for. A new beginning was on the horizon,